The English term enlightenment is the Western translation of the term bodhi, awakening, which has entered the Western world via the 19th century translations of Max Müller. It has the Western connotation of a sudden insight into a transcendental truth. The term is also being used to translate several other Buddhist terms and concepts used to denote insight. Knowledge. The blowing out of disturbing emotions and desires and the subsequent freedom or release. And the attainment of Buddhahood, as exemplified by Gautama Buddha. What exactly constituted the Buddha's awakening is unknown. It may probably have involved the knowledge that liberation was attained by the combination of mindfulness and I-or-na, applied to the understanding of the arising and ceasing of craving. The relation between dhyana and insight is a core problem in the study of Buddhism, and is one of the fundamentals of Buddhist practice. In the Western world, the concept of enlightenment has taken on a romantic meaning. It has become synonymous with self-realization and the true self, being regarded as a substantial essence being covered over by social conditioning. Translation. Robert S. Cohen notes that the majority of English books on Buddhism use the term enlightenment to translate the term bodhi. The root bud, from which both body and Buddha are derived, means to wake up, or to recover consciousness. Cohen notes that bodhi is not the result of an illumination, but of a path of realization, or coming to understanding. The term enlightenment is event-oriented, whereas the term awakening is process-oriented. The Western use of the term enlighten has Christian roots, as in Calvin's "It is God alone who enlightens our minds to perceive his truths." Early 19th century bodhi was translated as intelligence. The term enlighten was first being used in 1835, in an English translation of a French article. In 1857 the Times used the term the enlightened for the Buddha in a short article, which was reprinted the following year by Max Müller. Thereafter, the use of the term subsided, but reappeared with the publication of Max Müller's Chips from a German Workshop, which included a reprint from the Times article. The book was translated 1969 into German, using the term Der Erleuchtete. Max Müller was an essentialist, who believed in a natural religion, and saw religion as an inherent capacity of human beings. Enlightenment was a means to capture natural religious truths, as distinguished from mere mythology. By the mid-1870s it had become commonplace to call the Buddha enlightened, and by the end of the 1880s the terms enlightened and enlightenment dominated the English literature. Terms. Insight equals. Bodhi, from the verbal root bud, to awaken, to understand, means literally to have woken up and understood. According to Johannes Brunkhorst, Tilman Vetter, and K.R. Norman, bodhi was at first not specified. K.R. Norman. It is not at all clear what gaining bodhi means. We are accustomed to the translation enlightenment for bodhi, but this is misleading. It is not clear what the Buddha was awakened to, or at what particular point the awakening came. According to Norman, bodhi may basically have meant the knowledge that nibbana was attained, due to the practice of dhyana. Originally only praja may have been mentioned, and Tilman Vetter even concludes that originally dhyana itself was deemed liberating, with the stilling of pleasure of pain in the fourth jhana. Gombrich also argues that the emphasis on insight is a later development. In Theravada Buddhism, bodhi refers to the realization of the four stages of enlightenment and becoming an arahant. In Theravada Buddhism, bodhi is equal to supreme insight, and the realization of the Four Noble Truths, which leads to deliverance. According to Jnanatiloka, through bodhi, one awakens from the slumber or stupor by the defilements and comprehends the Four Noble Truths. This equation of bodhi with the Four Noble Truths is a later development, in response to developments within Indian religious thought, where liberating insight was deemed essential for liberation. The Four Noble Truths as the liberating insight of the Buddha eventually were superseded by Pratityasamattvadā, the 12-fold chain of causation, and still later by anatta, the emptiness of the self. In Mahayana Buddhism, bodhi is equal to praja, insight into the Buddha nature, sunyata and tathata. This is equal to the realization of the non-duality of absolute and relative. Praja, in Theravada Buddhism, prana means understanding, wisdom, insight. insight is equivalent to vipassana, insight into the three marks of existence, namely anicca, dukkha and anatta. Insight leads to the four stages of enlightenment and nirvana. In Mahayana Buddhism, prajna means insight, or wisdom, and entails insight into sunyata. The attainment of this insight is often seen as the attainment of enlightenment. Kensho and Satori are Japanese terms used in Zen traditions. Kensho means seeing into one's true nature. Ken means seeing, sho means nature, essence, Siku Buddha nature. Satori is often used interchangeably with Kensho, but refers to the experience of Kensho. The Rinzai tradition sees Kensho as essential to the attainment of Buddhahood, but considers further practice essential to attain Buddhahood. East Asian Buddhism emphasizes insight into Buddha nature. This term is derived from Indian Tathagata Garbha thought, the womb of the thus gone, the inherent potential of every sentient being to become a Buddha. This idea was integrated with the Yogasara idea of the A-layer Vijja plus or minus an hour, and further developed in Chinese Buddhism, which integrated Indian Buddhism with native Chinese thought. Buddha nature came to mean both the potential of awakening and the whole of reality, a dynamic interpenetration of absolute and relative. In this awakening it is realized that observer and observed are not distinct entities, but mutually codependent. Knowledge equals, the term vidor is being used in contrast to avedor, ignorance or the lack of knowledge, which binds us to samsara. The Mahasaccaka Sutta describes the three knowledges which the Buddha attained: insight into his past lives, insight into the workings of karma and reincarnation, insight into the Four Noble Truths. Freedom equals, vimutti, also called moksha, means freedom, release, deliverance. Sometimes a distinction is being made between cito vimutti, liberation of the mind, and phala vimutti, liberation by understanding. The Buddhist tradition recognizes two kinds of cito vimutti, one temporarily and one permanent, the last being equivalent to phala vimutti. Yogasara uses the term alangstram raya parava, TTI, revolution of the basis. A sudden revulsion, turning, or returning of the A-layer Vijja plus or minus an R back into its original state of purity. The mind returns to its original condition of non-attachment, non-discrimination and non-duality. Nirvana equals, nirvana is the blowing out of disturbing emotions, which is the same as liberation. The usage of the term enlightenment to translate nirvana was popularized in the 19th century, due, in part, to the efforts of Max Müller, who used the term consistently in his translations. Buddhahood Anuttara Samyak Saw to the first foreign body equals, Siddhartha Gautama, known as the Buddha, is said to have achieved full awakening, known as Samyak Saw to the first foreign body, perfect Buddhahood, or Anuttara Samyak Saw to the first foreign body, highest perfect awakening. The term Buddha has acquired somewhat different meanings in the various Buddhist traditions. An equivalent term for Buddha is Tathagata, the thus gone. The way to Buddhahood is somewhat differently understood in the various Buddhist traditions. Buddha's awakening equals. Canonical accounts. In the Satapitaka, the Buddhist canon is preserved in the Theravada tradition. A couple of texts can be found in which the Buddha's attainment of liberation forms part of the narrative. The Araya Pariyasana Sutta describes how the Buddha was dissatisfied with the teachings of Alara Kalama and Uddaka Ramaputta, wandered further through Magadhan country, and then found an agreeable piece of ground, which served for striving. The sutra then only says that he attained Nibbana. The Mahasaccaka Sutta describes his ascetic practices, which he abandoned. Thereafter he remembered a spontaneous state of jhana, and set out for jhana practice. After destroying the disturbances of the mind, and attaining concentration of the mind, he attained three knowledges: insight into his past lives, insight into the workings of karma and reincarnation, insight into the Four Noble Truths. According to the Mahasaccaka Sutta, these insights, including the way to attain liberation, led the Buddha himself straight to liberation. Called awakening. Critical assessment. Schmeithausen notes that the mention of the Four Noble Truths as constituting liberating insight, which is attained after mastering the Rupa jhanas, is a later addition to texts such as Majjhima Nikaya 36. Brunkhurst notices that the accounts which include the Four Noble Truths had a completely different conception of the process of liberation than the one which includes the Four Dhyanas and the destruction of the intoxicants. It calls in question the reliability of these accounts, and the relation between dhyana and insight, which is a core problem in the study of early Buddhism. Originally the term prajna may have been used, which came to be replaced by the Four Truths in those texts where liberating insight was preceded by the Four Jhanas. Brunkhurst also notices that the conception of what exactly this liberating insight was developed throughout time. Whereas originally it may not have been specified, later on the Four Truths served as such, to be superseded by pratitya samutpada, and still later, in the Hinayana schools, by the doctrine of the non-existence of a substantial self or person. And Schmidhausen notices that still other descriptions of this liberating insight exist in the Buddhist canon. That the five skandhas are impermanent, disagreeable, and neither the self nor belonging to oneself. The contemplation of the arising and disappearance of the five skandhas. The realization of the skandhas as empty, vain and without any pith or substance. An example of this substitution, and its consequences, is Majjhima Nikaya 36:42-43, which gives an account of the awakening of the Buddha. Development of Buddhahood in Buddhist traditions in Theravada Buddhism, reaching full awakening is equivalent in meaning to reaching nirvana the first day. Attaining nirvana the first day is the ultimate goal of Theravada and other Angstrom-Ravaka traditions. It involves the abandonment of the 10 fetters and the cessation of dukkha or suffering. Full awakening is reached in 4 stages. In Mahayana Buddhism the Bodhisattva is the ideal. The ultimate goal is not only of one's own liberation and Buddhahood, but the liberation of all living beings. In time, the Buddha's awakening came to be understood as an immediate full awakening and liberation, instead of the insight into uncertainty about the way to follow to reach enlightenment. However, in some Zen traditions this perfection came to be relativized again. According to one contemporary Zen master, Shakyamuni Buddha and Bodhidharma were still practicing. But Mahayana Buddhism also developed a cosmology with a wide range of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, who assist humans on their way to liberation. Western understanding of enlightenment. In the Western world the concept of enlightenment has taken on a romantic meaning. It has become synonymous with self-realization and the true self, being regarded as a substantial essence being covered over by social conditioning. Enlightenment is a UFKLA currency rung equals. The use of the Western word enlightenment is based on the supposed resemblance of body with a UFKLA currency rung, the independent use of reason to gain insight into the true nature of our world. In fact there are more resemblances with Romanticism than with the Enlightenment, the emphasis on feeling, on intuitive insight, on a true essence beyond the world of appearances. Awakening the equivalent term awakening has also been used in a Christian context, namely the Great Awakenings, several periods of religious revival in American religious history. Historians and theologians identify 3 or 4 waves of increased religious enthusiasm occurring between the early 18th century and the late 19th century. Each of these Great Awakenings was characterized by widespread revivals led by evangelical Protestant ministers, a sharp increase of interest in religion, a profound sense of conviction and redemption on the part of those affected, an increase in evangelical church membership, and the formation of new religious movements and denominations. Romanticism and transcendentalism the romantic idea of enlightenment as insight into a timeless, transcendent reality has been popularized especially by D.T. Suzuki. Further popularization was due to the writings of Heinrich Dumoulin. Dumoulin viewed metaphysics as the expression of a transcendent truth, which according to him was expressed by Mahayana Buddhism, but not by the pragmatic analysis of the oldest Buddhism, which emphasizes anatta. This romantic vision is also recognizable in the works of Ken Wilber. In the oldest Buddhism this essentialism is not recognizable. According to critics it doesn't really contribute to a real insight into Buddhism. Most of them labor under the old cliché copyright that the goal of Buddhist psychological analysis is to reveal the hidden mysteries in the human mind and thereby facilitate the development of a transcendental state of consciousness beyond the reach of linguistic expression. Enlightenment and experience equals. A common reference in Western culture is the notion of Enlightenment experience. This notion can be traced back to William James, who used the term religious experience in his book, The Varieties of Religious Experience. Wayne Proudfoot traces the roots of the notion of religious experience further back to the German theologian Friedrich Schleiermacher, who argued that religion is based on a feeling of the infinite. Schleiermacher used the notion of religious experience to defend religion against the growing scientific and secular critique. It was popularized by the Transcendentalists, and exported to Asia via missionaries. Transcendentalism developed as a reaction against 18th-century rationalism, John Locke's philosophy of sensualism, and the predestinationism of New England Calvinism. It is fundamentally a variety of diverse sources such as Hindu texts like the Vedas, the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, various religions, and German idealism. It was adopted by many scholars of religion, of which William James was the most influential. The notion of experience has been criticized. Robert Scharf points out that experience is a typical Western term, which has found its way into Asian religiosity via Western influences. The notion of experience introduces a false notion of duality between experiencer and experienced, whereas the essence of Kensho is the realization of the non-duality of observer and observed. Pure experience does not exist. All experience is mediated by intellectual and cognitive activity. The specific teachings and practices of a specific tradition may even determine what experience someone has, which means that this experience is not the proof of the teaching, but a result of the teaching. A pure consciousness without concepts, reached by cleaning the doors of perception as per Romantic poet William Blake, would, according to Mu, be an overwhelming chaos of sensory input without coherence. Bodhi Day, Sakyamuni's Buddhahood is celebrated on Bodhi Day. In Sri Lanka and Japan different days are used for this celebration. According to the Theravada tradition in Sri Lanka, Sakyamuni reached Buddhahood at the full moon in May. This is celebrated at Wesak Poya, the full moon in May, as Sambuddhatva Jayanthi. According to the Zen tradition, the Buddha reached his decisive insight on December 8. This is celebrated in Zen monasteries with a very intensive 8-day session of Rahatsu. See also, Buddhist philosophy, Buddhism and psychology, Illuminationism, Enlightenment, Huangaku, Subbatism, Wisdom. Notes. References. Web references. Sources. External links, Pali Text Society, Occurrences of the Term Enlightenment, Joan Sutherland, What is Enlightenment? Buddhadharma February 16, 2013, Barbara O'Brien, What is Enlightenment?